Hi, so we're going to go ahead and continue working on our cell structure and function notes. Hopefully you've watched the YouTube video that I put a link on that talked about the cell theory and all the scientists that you need to know. So if you haven't watched that, make sure that you go back and watch that as well. You can watch it now or at the end whenever you choose. So what we're going to focus on in this part of our notes is the structure and function of the cell, the parts that make up the cell. So I thought we should start by making sure we have a definition of the cell. And the definition of a cell is that it's the basic structure and function of life. In other words, it's the smallest unit that can do all of the characteristics of life that we talked about at the beginning of the year, like reproduction and responding to stimuli and metabolism, homeostasis, all that whole list that we had at the beginning of the year. One cell can do all of those individual things. Here are some examples of cells. So an amoeba is a one-celled organism that's able to do all those functions that we talked about. A plant stem is part of a multicellular organism. A plant is made up of many, many cells, just like you are, but it can still do all the individual functions. Bacteria are another single-celled organism without a nucleus, and we'll talk more about that in a second. Here's an example of what a nerve cell from your body looks like, and a red blood cell. So you can see that all different types of cells look different. Cells don't look the same. They're all unique in their own way. Okay, so let's talk about the differences between prokaryote and eukaryotic cells. So prokaryotic cells do not have any organelles, which are the little units inside of a cell. They have very few internal structures. They have cytoplasm, they have the nucleoid region, which is where their DNA is located. It's not a nucleus, it's just a region in the cell that has the DNA, and they have ribosomes. They are all one-celled organisms, and they're bacteria. So here's what one would look like. So you might want to sketch that little diagram. So they're very, very, very simple. These are flagella, we'll talk about in a second. Something else that you should mention in your notes that's not on here is that they're about 10 times smaller than a eukaryotic cell. About 10 times smaller. And so hopefully you remember that from the web quest that you did, that you can fit about 10 of them into one of your cells. Some of them also have flagella in order to help them move from place to place. So you can see that, and those are these little hair-like projections that are coming off of them. And it's just some of them have them, not all of them. And they help them move around. That's their whole function. Okay? All right, so moving on to eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells have organelles that are surrounded by membranes. So they're just little, organelle means little organ. So if you think about your organs, you have a stomach that's used for digestion, a brain that helps to control the rest of your body, a heart that pumps out blood. So you have little things inside of your cells that are doing similar functions, just on a much smaller scale. Most living organisms are eukaryotic. Like I said, prokaryotic organisms are only bacteria. All bacteria are prokaryotes, and only bacteria. Here's an example of what an animal cell looks like, and here's an example of what a plant cell looks like. And we'll look more at it. You don't necessarily have to sketch this one like I asked you to for the prokaryotic ones, but if you want to do like just a rough drawing to show that it has lots of parts in it, I think that would be beneficial to your notes. Okay, so let's compare and contrast prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So first of all, they have three things in common. They have a cell membrane, they have ribosomes, and they have cytoplasm. Prokaryotes have a nucleoid region, which is where they're going to have their DNA. Eukaryotes have all of these organelles, and we're going to talk about each one of those individually, but they have things like a nucleus and endoplasmic reticulum and Golgi. Hopefully you remember, you've already done a web class on this, so I'm assuming that these words are at least familiar to you, and as we go through the notes, you should know the functions of those as well. So when we talk about eukaryotic cells, we're going to start talking about their parts and their functions in a little bit more detail. We have several subdivisions of the cell. The first one is the plasma membrane. Plasma membrane separates the outside from the cell from the environment. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. The nucleus is the regulatory center of the cell. That's another division. And then the third division is the cytoplasm. And the cytoplasm is everything else in between the plasma membrane and the nucleus. So it's kind of like a jelly-like substance. It holds all the organelles. Some cell reactions will occur in there, but that's the cytoplasm. Okay, so let's start talking about these parts. So you need to make sure that you're looking at your chart, and as you go through the chart, make sure you fill in the structure and the function. Remember, that's a big, big theme. And then on the columns where it says plant, animal, and bacteria, you're just putting check marks in those three. So the structure and the function have words describing them. Or for structure, if you want to draw a picture, you can do that. And then check marks for bacteria, plant, and animal. Okay? All right, so let's start with the cell membrane. All living things have a cell membrane, so you should have a check mark in plant, animal, and bacteria. It's one of the common characteristics of all of them. It's the outer membrane of the cell that controls the movement in and out. So that's the function of the cell. So it's the outer membrane, controls movement of things in and out. Selectively permeable means that some things can get in and some things cannot. The structure is that it's made up of phospholipids and proteins. So, and you have two layers of that. So remember we talked about phospholipids with our last unit. You have two layers. One layer of phospholipids here, the second layer here, and then proteins embedded within it. Okay, and its job is to separate the outside from the inside. Here's the inside of the cell, here's the outside of the cell. That's its job. Okay, so take a second, write down what you need about the function and the structure. If you want to, I would suggest sketching a diagram as well. That should help you remember what these things look like. The next structure is the nucleus, and the nucleus is surrounded by a nuclear envelope, which has many pores in it to let things in and out. It is the control center of the cell. It directs the cell's activities. It contains the genetic material in the form of DNA. So that's where the DNA is located in a eukaryotic cell. In a prokaryotic cell, remember we said it was in the nucleoid region. Only plants and animals have a nucleus. Bacteria do not, so do not put a check mark there. Oops, let's go back for a second. Okay, so the structure is that it's surrounded by a nuclear envelope that has lots of pores, and then it contains DNA, and then its function is to direct the cell activities. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened to my picture for this one, so we'll have pictures for the rest. Chromatin, this is kind of, you can see it condensed as chromosomes in this picture here. It's located in the nucleus. It's made of DNA and protein, so that's what you can put for the structure. And the function is that it contains instructions for traits and characteristics. It contains the instructions for your traits and your characteristics. Another thing for structure is that it condenses to form chromosomes during replication. And once it's in chromosomes, it looks like this. But otherwise, it looks like kind of like a ball of yarn is kind of how you can describe it. Just threads of yarn. Then the nucleolus is also inside of the nucleus, and it's the dense structure in the middle made up of rRNA, and its function is to make ribosomes. So here's a picture of our nucleus that we were talking about before. All these little thread-like things are chromatin, and then this dense-like structure in the center is the nucleolus. These little holes are the nuclear pores that I talked about. So I would label all of that stuff. This is the whole thing is the nucleus. These little thread-like structures are the chromatin, and this structure here is the nucleolus, whose function is to make ribosomes. Okay? Next are ribosomes. The function of the ribosome, it's made up of rRNA and protein, and each cell has thousands of them. It's the most numerous organelle in the whole body, and its function is to make proteins. You can find them in two places. They're either going to be attached to the endoplasmic reticulum, or they're going to be free-floating in the cytoplasm, and they're just kind of look like little circles. They don't have a membrane on them, so it's a little bit different than the other things that we've talked about. They are found in all three cells, plants, animals, and bacteria. Let me go back. The nucleolus is only in plants and animals. Chromatin is found in all three. Okay, cytomembrane system is plants and animals only. It's called the endoplasmic reticulum, which means within the cytoplasm network. But what it is, the structure, is that it's a system of tubes and sacs formed by membranes. Now the difference between the two is that the rough has ribosomes attached to the tubes and the smooth does not have ribosomes. So that's where your distinction should be on the structure. So here you can see that it's located close to the nucleus. The rough is located right next to the nucleus, and it has all these little bumps on them. Those little bumps are the ribosomes. Their function is to make proteins and to transport proteins. The smooth has different function. It's still this network of tubules and membranes, but its function is different. Its function is to make lipids and to detoxify drugs. Okay? Next is the Golgi body. The Golgi body is right here, located again close to the ER. So you have the nucleus, then you have the endoplasmic reticulum, then you have the Golgi body. This is again another series of membranes, but instead of being interconnected, they are separate little sacs, kind of like a stack of pancakes, and then they form these little vesicles, which are going to hold the materials. Its function is to modify, sort, and package proteins. So once the proteins are made and transported, it goes to the Golgi, and there they're going to be modified, which means to change them. You can add things to them. You can break them in half, sort them so they know where they're going to go, and then package them into these little vesicles. So they get packaged into what are called a vesicle. Okay, the next structure is the mitochondria. So the mitochondria looks like this. It's the powerhouse of the cell. It's what gives you all of your energy. We go through what's called cellular respiration. We've talked about that a little bit before, not a whole lot, but you should at least know that it breaks down glucose into ATP. So cellular respiration. This inner membrane here is highly folded so you can have more reactions. And so since you have more reactions, that means that you have more cellular respiration, which means more energy in the end. Mitochondria is found in plants and animals. Okay, both of those. The next structure that we're going to talk about is the lysosome. The lysosome is found in animals only. And it has a bunch of digestive enzymes surrounded by a membrane. So you can see it's kind of a small structure in relation to a lot of the other things. And then inside of those, all those little dots are digestive enzymes. And so its function is digestion of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. And then if for some reason the cell were to break open, and sometimes it does that on purpose as a method of protecting the whole organism, these digestive enzymes will digest the whole entire cell. It's called a suicide sac sometimes. Okay, the next one is the cytoskeleton. The cytoskeleton is broken up into two parts. The microtubules, which are hollow tubes, which help give the cell shape and help move organelles from place to place. And microfilaments, which are thinner pieces, but it gives movement of the whole entire cell and helps give support of the cell. So you can see the difference. You have microtubules, which are much thicker, and they're made up of protein. So the structure is thicker protein, kind of like a straw. And the actin filaments is more like a piece of thread, and they're just a lot thinner. And these are the microfilaments. Actin filaments or microfilaments are the same thing. Okay, so microtubules really thick, actin or microfilaments very thin, and helps to give shape and structure and support, and also helps with movement. So the function is the same, it's just what the structure is. Okay, centrioles are also found only in animals. They are made of rings of microtubules, and there's 9 groups of these rings, as you can see here, and then when they're together, usually arranged at right angles to each other, and their function is to organize chromosomes during cell reproduction. Okay, almost finished. The cell wall is next. The cell wall, you can see, is made up of 2 layers of this material, and the material in plant cells is called cellulose, and in bacteria it's called peptidoglycan. Plant cells and bacteria cells have cell walls, plants and bacteria, and the function, again, is support and protection. Chloroplast is only found in plant cells, and it has green chlorophyll, and the function is photosynthesis. So it can make glucose. So in mitochondria, we're breaking the glucose down, and in chloroplasts, we're making the glucose. Found only in plant cells. And their arrangement or their structure is that it's made up of these stacks of membranes, and again, stacks for more surface area, for more reactions to occur, so therefore we get more glucose. Okay, but they are made up of stacks of membranes instead of the inner membrane like we talked about with the mitochondria. Okay, then the last organelle that we're going to talk about is a vacuole. And the vacuole is a membrane-bound sac that whose function is storage. You're trying to store some things for a long period of time. So this is a vacuole in a plant cell. You can see that it's pretty large, whereas in an animal cell it's much smaller. And that's because plants need lots of water, and that you're going to be storing water there. So in addition to the cell wall giving structure and support for the vacuole, so excuse me, so does the vacuole. So it's much, much larger, although both plants and animals have it. It's much larger in plant cells, so you might want to make a note of that. Okay, please make sure that you go back and you make sure that you know the structure and function of all of the organelles that we've talked about today. And if you have any questions, make sure that you jot those down so we can go over them in class tomorrow, and let me know what you need. Thanks. Have a good day.